Today I have Christina Crowe. She's returning again to discuss ADHD in a different lens. And Christina is the founder of Dig a Little Deeper Psychotherapy and Counseling in Ontario and PEI. And
Mhm.
she's the host of the Making the Invisible Visible podcast. You might remember her from episode 81, where we discussed the difference between psychotherapy and coaching. But this time I want to bring her in because I saw her at a CADRA conference in St. John's, Newfoundland, Canada, where she talked about ADHD in a different lens. And I was really intrigued and I want to gain more insight on this. Christina, thanks again for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's always fun to come back. And I always like the things that you catch and want to dig into a little bit more.
Thank you. So you made a presentation at CADRA, which is, I'm going to get it wrong, but the Canadian ADHD Alliance Research. What's CADRA
I think
again?
it's the Canadian ADHD Resource Alliance. I feel
Uh,
like the name's maybe shifted over time. I think it used to be the Physician Resource
yeah.
Alliance, and I think now it's opened up to be more broad to other clinicians too.
Yeah. So this was really interesting. It's a conference shares research data, different research, and the clinical side, which was fantastic for me. Um, so what did you mean by ADHD in a different lens?
Well, I'm a psychotherapist, so I see people who come to me, they call up, they want to talk to somebody. Somebody's told them that therapy would help with whatever problem they've got. So whether I'm talking to somebody who has ADHD or not, or does and doesn't know they have it, what have you, I've got to do some, dot connecting in the first, say, 1 to 3 sessions that helps me do this thing that we call forming a case conceptualization, which is basically like a mapping, an understanding
Right.
of what this person is about, what their values are, what's important to them, and what exactly are the nuances of the challenges that they're facing. And so not if I didn't know anything about ADHD, then there's a lot of things that I would label incorrectly, but that would still pass mustard. Is that a saying? What they say?
I know what you mean.
And you could spend a long time in therapy, like you could spend 10 or 20 sessions in therapy, and the subject of ADHD wouldn't come up if the clinician doesn't know that that's a thing that can cause symptoms that look a lot like other conditions in mental health. But when you do know about ADHD, that's the different lens, is that all of a sudden everything looks really different, and you can really kind of do amazing things with people if it is in fact ADHD, and you can help them seek the appropriate treatment.
So can you give me some examples? So what do you mean by, some ADHD are similar to other mental health conditions, and
Mm-hmm.
how can they be misunderstood?
So, what ADHD looks like when it walks through a family physician's door is anxiety and depression. That's how the symptoms present. Like, there's no flashing a light that says this is what ADHD is, for example. People with ADHD struggle with executive function. So, say like planning or being organized or missing appointments. Maybe you're a patient who's missed their appointment a couple times, been charged late fees, things like
Mhm.
that. But executive function decreases in almost every mental health condition when you're experiencing the actual condition. So if you have anxiety, you don't have a decrease in executive function all the time. You have it when you're actually anxious. But when the anxiety episode resolves itself, your executive function kind of comes back online. But with ADHD, it's always off and on, off and on. And the only time you can really count on it is probably when you're in a hyper focus. That is a good
Yeah.
thing, right? But it's not something that can be as predictable in that way. And things like people zoning out in a conversation or in a session can be mistaken for like a dissociation associated with trauma. And we know now that there is this bidirectional relationship between trauma and ADHD. And sometimes people misinterpret that data to think that trauma can cause the ADHD, and then they only treat the trauma
Right.
without realizing that they actually need to treat both. And trauma symptoms and ADHD symptoms look a lot alike. And they're actually, if you look at patients under MRI and you look at their brain function, they're actually operating kind of similar parts of the brains and similar neural pathways.
Yeah.
So
So
how do you
that's
know which one it is, right?
yeah. So along that line, so basically a lot of research right now that's coming out is saying that the areas of your neural pathways for trauma, used for trauma, are actually used for ADHD.
Yeah, their responses are similar. So,
Yeah.
like the fear response, when you have, say, a flashback or a nightmare, if you've got PTSD, light up the same areas of fight or flight in distractibility and ability to sustain attention that an ADHD brain experiences.
Mhm.
So, is it the chicken or the egg? Either way,
Yeah.
you have to treat both, right?
Yeah. And I've heard and read a lot that if we treat, a lot of times if you treat the ADHD first, the anxiety, the depression, the other
Organically
issues are
resolve.
going to resolve.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so what I also
There's
heard was
others too, but
like what?
those are kind of big ones. Well, like substance use and addictions, eating
Mhm.
disorders, people who have ever been recommended to go to anger management. I don't even know what anger management is. Like, you have to understand why you've got a dysregulation and anger is your
Yeah.
go-to. What's underneath that is often inattention to how you got into a situation in the first place, poor impulse control, emotional dysregulation, and then we're
And
flipping our lids left, right, and center.
yeah.
That's ADHD stuff,
And a
right?
lot of it has to do with childhood trauma too, that I'm starting to notice, but that anger,
Sure.
you mean it,
Yeah. Yeah.
emotional response is what actually is, in my case, always happens.
Yeah.
Um, so ADHD, you said what ADHD looks like. Sorry, what I heard you say was most doctors or general practitioners will see ADHD symptoms as anxiety or depressions. Can you expand on that a little more and why they may think that or see that?
Well, what does it look like when someone's anxious? Like they might be a little bit tense, they might be darting around, they might be vigilant. Is that vigilance or is it distractibility? Who knows what that is, but physically on the outside, the symptoms kind of look the same. Also, untreated ADHD for a long time is pretty anxiety inducing. That leads to anxiety, and untreated anxiety kind of organically develops into depression if this cycle
Yes.
isn't right. So there's a natural course of how this goes. Physicians want to treat the most obvious thing first with the least intervention, right? So they're trained to see horses, not zebras. So if it looks like a horse, I'm going to treat it like it's a horse because chances are it's not a zebra. And despite the fact that ADHD is actually really it's the most common, psychiatric diagnosis that kids can get. I don't even really like saying it's a psychiatric diagnosis, but
Mhm.
technically it is. And therefore kids grow up to be adults. So it's also really prevalent in the adult population. So, and a lot of people are still wildly underdiagnosed. So I think a lot of people kind of wonder, oh, everyone's got ADHD now. Why are so many people being diagnosed? It's because so many people were undiagnosed to begin with. So we're still
Yeah.
just catching up,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And
That's,
so
yeah. Go ahead.
I'll just say one more thing about that. So, okay, that's fair. It looks like anxiety. Let's treat you with an anxiety. Let's recommend you go for anxiety CBT, maybe based treatment or dialectical behavior therapy treatment. And then what's supposed to happen for the next step of care is that if it doesn't work or there's still symptoms, the patient is supposed to come back to the doctor and say, Doc, I did this medicine for 3 months. I went to therapy for 10 sessions. I'm still struggling. Some things got better, but I'm still really struggling with these other things. But all of that requires a lot of executive function, which is what somebody with ADHD doesn't have. So then that therein is where the whole process falls apart, is that in order to perform this least intervention step up care kind of philosophy, you have to make sure that there's actually a system in place for the patient to come back to you. And maybe
Mhm.
one easy thing would be to make an automatic appointment for that 3-month follow-up. But if people can't access care, if it's impossible to find a therapist, if blah, 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 they might make it back in time and not forget their 3-month appointment. But have they actually achieved any of those things and stuck with them? Because it takes executive function to do that stuff.
Yeah.
So the biggest clue for physicians probably is, did your patient get better and were they compliant with the recommendations? And if they weren't, it's not that they're resistant, it's that we're treating the wrong thing.
Right. And the other thing too is I found, like, honestly, one of the reasons I was able to get my treatment and my diagnosis quickly is I never let go.
Yeah.
I told everything, and I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding that all doctors, no matter what specialists or GPs, they're supposed to figure it all out for you. without
Mhm.
you doing anything, which I think is wrong. Like healthcare is a two-way street. The only way
I
they
would
can
agree
help
with
me
that.
treat me is if I tell them everything. I'm having this struggle and explain. If they ask me questions, I didn't shut down. I heard what their questions were, and I came back with answers that
Mhm.
would make more sense. Because one thing he
Mhm.
did, he gave me a prescription for depression right off the bat.
Mm.
So, in his training, his education as a GP, which they have to know a lot, I
Mhm.
didn't fault them. It's just that's the way the system is. But I kept
Yeah.
advocating for myself. And that's what I want this episode to kind of be is if we understand these differences, we can better communicate to our healthcare providers. And I think you
Yeah.
make a fantastic point. We have to go back and say it's not working, and we
Yeah.
have that right. And it's not up to the doctor to check in with you all the time to see if they have it right, because honestly, they don't have the time,
Yeah.
especially in Canada. But we got to take advantage. We got to be advocates for ourselves.
Yeah,
So
we have to demand the health care that we need, whether we think we
yes.
deserve it or not. That's not the point of this discussion, but it's nobody's going to come save you. Nobody's going to come do it for you, unfortunately. I mean, it'd be great if they were. And that's like one more slap in the face, I think, for people who've grown up feeling a bit neglected and, like they're just kind of like a leaf blowing in the wind through most of their lives, right? Oh, here's one more
Mhm.
thing. I got to have the energy to manage and follow up. It's trauma triggering from our childhoods for sure, but it is what it is. And I think no one is meant to do it alone though, right? So if there's one message that I would want to pair with that, it's that get somebody who understands how to work this system, hopefully, a wily therapist who probably or coach who's probably neurodivergent themselves and has figured a couple things out on board to help you and take advantage of all the free resources that clinician offers or
And
that
also
coach
include
offers.
family and friends in that help,
Yeah,
right? Like honestly,
agreed.
if it wasn't for my wife to help me and support me along the way, and a couple of friends to kind of help keep me accountable, it would be a different story right now. So
Was
yes,
it was it hard for you to ask them to help you?
I didn't ask. They did.
Okay,
But I'll tell you one thing, it is hard for me to ask, is I've always done everything by myself.
right.
I've always relied on myself,
Mm.
right? So then that's it. Like we're talking about offline, it's a bad habit that I got into. And
All of us, yeah.
I'm slowly learning it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to say thank you for the help and
Yeah,
not to take it as a lack or weak that I can't do it by myself. Because a lot of this we can't.
absolutely.
And honestly, with the mental health, I did a short about how the mental health take that seriously, but recovery takes time. We want to be done in a couple
It all
months, but
takes
it
time.
takes years and it takes time.
Yep.
And it'll take longer if you want to do it by yourself, or it won't happen
Yep.
in my thing. So how about we go over a couple more examples of what ADHD looks like on the outside,
Sure.
but it's actually inside. So one thing you mentioned in your presentation, that work nervousness,
Hmm.
um, to excel and not drop the ball can be shown as anxiety.
Yeah. So if, for example, I say I have a big work project that I'm working on and I rely on, because I procrastinate, because it's hard to be internally motivated to be consistently working away at something. I actually rely on the pressure that comes from leaving something to the last minute.
Mhm.
So I get that burst of adrenaline.
The
I mean, this was
urgency.
me in my undergrad. So
Yeah.
I know I have a 25-page paper due months and months in advance, but I don't start it until 48 hours before it's due because I need that burst of adrenaline to help my brain focus and I can bang out an amazing paper. And that works when I'm 20 and 21 and 22.
Mhm.
But when I'm 35 and 36 and I have little kids at home and I've got, things that are due and a husband to pay attention to and a dog to walk and a mother to pay attention to, I can't procrastinate and leave everything to the last minute because then everybody else in my life pays the price for
Mhm.
that.
So
So,
more
so
of an
then from
executive
time to
function than man.
time, I do drop the ball.
Yeah.
I have dropped the ball. So my nervousness about my performance at work is not irrational or anything. It's actually based on the fact that sometimes I excel and I perform really well, and sometimes I'm a bag of poo. And if I don't know I have ADHD, there's no rhyme or reason in my mind, I don't know what the difference is because I
Mhm.
haven't identified my own patterns and my own things that get in the way. So when I show up, people to a therapist, they'll say, "Oh, you're procrastinating. You must have an emotional avoidance issue." I'm not emotionally avoiding anything, man. If I could get my brain to do it, I would. It would make me really happy, but I'm not actually actively emotionally avoiding anything. I'd rather watch the last season of 90210 than write a 25-page paper. And
Mhm.
now I'm dating myself, right? So it's important. So then we could like give me an anti-anxiety pill or start me on a course of CBT for anxiety. And none of those things will uncover the fact that I have undiagnosed ADHD, because the premise of CBT for anxiety is that I've got a rational thought that I'm weighing too heavily, that's affecting my emotional experience, that then therefore affecting the things I do in my life.
So from the outside, it looks like we're always anxious and working hard and being frilly, but we're trying to keep it inside. Our executive functioning, try to keep it all inside and together.
Yeah. We don't even
So
know that there's a thing. Like, we don't know
yeah,
that other people don't do this too. There's some level of procrastination that everybody does, but the level of procrastination that people with ADHD do for the purpose of fueling focus, right?
yeah,
It's not, and it's the difference between people who drink a lot of coffee versus people who drink a lot of coffee for the purpose of focusing and staying awake, and they need it in order to function. That's really different than somebody that just enjoys the latte in the
yeah,
afternoon,
yeah.
right?
So another thing you said there, I think it might be misunderstood from the outside, is emotional reactions.
Okay.
Is it borderline personality or is it depression? So
Mhm.
I've been accused all the time I'm always emotional. So I
Yeah,
must have
you're a
some,
human. We're all
right.
emotional.
But with our intensity of the intensity of our
Intensity is the
emotions,
word.
the
Yeah.
outside sees that as a lot of overreacting, being silly, worrying about nothing,
Yep.
or like sometimes it becomes anger or
Yep.
just big blow ups.
Yep.
Um, but no one wants to try and understand the why, but they just treat it as though you're sensitive and emotional
Hmm.
and walk away.
Hmm. There's a couple of good distinguishing features between, so ADHD can most certainly go alongside borderline personality
Mhm.
disorder or mood disorder like depression, but it isn't necessarily going alongside any of those things and can be mistaken for those things. And I would say with ADHD, that a lot of those intense mood switches happen. We know exactly what pissed us off, first of all.
Mhm.
And so it doesn't matter if it makes sense. We know what it is. And the mood switches can happen multiple times throughout a day, like a light switch going off and on. So it seems really erratic and unstable to someone who doesn't know us, but to us, it makes perfect sense about why I'm as mad as I am about how slow the Canada Post line is, for example.
Oh, don't start
Right.
that.
Whereas with a mood disorder, it's actually not really clear what's causing the low mood and the drop in mood, and it doesn't get better in a day or even 3 days. It's like a longer period of time of really low mood. So that's a differentiating feature there.
Yeah.
And there's
I,
a lot of differences with borderline personality disorder as well, that can kind of, at a quick glance to the untrained eye, maybe look like ADHD, but it's important to remember that the prevalence of ADHD is like 3 times that as
mhm.
borderline personality disorder. So if you've been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, you might have it, but if you haven't had ADHD ruled out, you should have ADHD ruled out,
Yeah.
because that would be the more obvious consideration.
Yeah. And the other thing too, I think you just said there, um, mood disorders, I guess there's no real trigger, but in ADHD,
Mhm.
there is a trigger.
Yeah,
And the mood disorders, it just happens.
it's a shift. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
It's hard to put your finger on it.
Yeah. And that's what Chuck, we were just talking about a few episodes ago about his depression, was there's no rhyme or reason to his depression.
Yep.
Just couldn't figure it
That's
out.
that's more true depression.
But
Yep.
when you said is we know why we get pissed off or
Yeah.
upset.
Like
It's
those mood
just it's
switches. Yeah.
triggered somehow.
Yep. And it's being thrown off your game. So the
Yeah.
reason the Canada Post slow line is making me mad is because it's making me late, because I didn't account for the fact that that could happen because I'm not good at planning ahead
And
and
we're also
coming up
running behind to
with
start.
contingency plans. And I'm always running 2 minutes late. Sorry to all my clients and, and to my family and to everybody. And it just never occurred to me that this would be something that would throw a wrench in my day, when as a 46-year-old, that's absurd.
Mhm.
right? And I'm also trying to get too many things done in a day.
Yeah.
So it's the constellation of the whole picture, right?
I remember I just hired a VA and she goes, let's see your to-do list. So I took 5 pictures of a big sheet. She goes, this is your to-do list when you want to get this done, like in the next month. So we're having a serious discussion right now on how to pare that out. But for
Yeah.
some reason, we think we can do all that.
Yes. I'm always trying to get people to take things off their lists. Our to-do lists are crazy.
Yeah.
They're totally absurd.
Now, what about OCD? What will make it look like as OCD to others?
So one of the hallmarks of executive function is the ability to be flexible in our thinking, to roll with the punches, to roll with a change in plans. So therefore, if we have executive dysfunction, we're pretty rigid thinkers. We're pretty black and white thinkers. And we do not like it when our plans change last minute, generally. Like these are generalizations, right? This is not
No,
going to
it's
apply to
true.
everybody.
Check for me.
Yeah, but if then we have an idea of how Saturday is going to go, for example, and people thinking of their kids would think of this, but then you throw, well, I decided we're going to do this instead last minute. Oh, forget it. Right.
Mhm.
Like that. It's just as an adult, you figure out how to roll with it, but it's really hard to do as a kid and as a teen and even probably in your 20s. Right. So it
Yeah.
can throw not only your mood, but your whole weekend off. Right. So that kind of rigidity, or my coat always has to go in this hanger, or my forks and knives have to go in this drawer in this way. And people might look at that and go, oh, OCD. Like they
Yep.
first misuse the word or the acronym,
Mhm.
but it's not because you feel compelled to do that. You think bad things are going to happen to you. It's because if you don't put your coat there, you will never find it again in your house.
Yay, someone understands.
Yeah. So then if you go then to a clinician who only understands those things, rigidity, for example, the other thing is like body focused repetitive behaviors like
Mhm.
skin picking or hair pulling or biting your nails or cracking your knuckles. Those are all
Okay, let's
things
hold on.
that,
Let's let the listeners kind of go, yep.
yeah,
Okay, let's go. They caught
yeah.
up.
So those are all things that fall under this category called body focused repetitive behaviors. That's kind of self
Mhm.
explanatory, but they fall under the umbrella of OCD, which is under the umbrella of
Mhm.
anxiety diagnostically. But they might not be OCD if the function of those brain driven behaviors is actually just to regulate ourselves up or down.
It's
So
our
if it's the,
systems.
yeah. So if I'm driving in my car and I'm kind of bored, I am gnawing on my nails like I haven't eaten a meal in 5 days.
Mhm.
But it's not because I'm hungry, and it's not because I quite enjoy the taste of my fingernails.
You're bored.
It's actually not even, it's so unconscious. I'm not even consciously bored because I'm
Right.
lost in my thoughts or I'm listening to your latest podcast. It's that my brain knows it needs more focus juice on board,
Right.
and it's stimulating. So it stimulates my brain function. So when
Mhm.
people come to me and they're like, I got to stop biting my nails, I'm like, when do you do it? I'm doing it here. Well, that's actually keeping you alive and safe on the road. So
Mhm.
you
True.
can not do it there if you want, but we can't leave you with nothing
Yeah.
filling that gap because you're going to be in the next single car accident I read about in the news.
Yeah, I got a little slinky on my driving on the gear shifter.
Oh
I
yeah,
take that and I just
you can
play with
fiddle with
that.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. I
yeah,
found that was a course I took in 2011. It's been in my truck ever since because I
yeah.
accidentally put it there and it's like, hey, this is handy.
That's cool. Yeah,
So
look, so
yeah.
you can replace the behaviors that annoy
Yeah.
you or your partner or whatever, but it's important to know why you're doing it in the first place and what
Mhm.
function it's doing for your brain so that
So
you can do it sustainably.
so we're not crazy. We have our
No.
systems in place so that we can
Yep.
remember and don't have to waste a bunch of mental energy trying to find something. I got that with my hutch in the corner. Everything I need to go out with me the next morning that's not standard
There.
goes in
Yeah.
my hat. And if
Yep.
someone puts a piece of paper on top of the hat, it's gone. It's gone. So we're not OCD. It's our mechanism
Yeah.
to keep ourselves
The
going.
survival tool.
The one last thing I want to talk about quickly here, we're running a bit of time, but you also said that creativity is the ability to generate ideas that are novel and useful. And that's because it's due to the defocused attention that
Mm.
we're always accused of being in the
Mm.
clouds, not paying attention.
Yeah.
But when you said that, that is where I am coming up with the best ideas is when I'm
Yeah.
just distracted for no
It's when your
reason.
mind can wander in a
Yeah.
moment. Oh, we come up with like a couple $1 million ideas a day.
Yeah.
It's great.
So what all I wanted to get here and talk about this is that you're normal for you.
Mhm.
Who cares if you accuse of not being paying attention? Because you're probably doing your best thinking you've done in a long time.
Yeah.
And to keep that in mind, our creativity is there because of the defocused attention. And when you said that, I just wrote that down. I just quoted those two words, defocused attention.
Mm.
And I think we all have to be aware and realize that is when we are the most creative and
Mhm.
come up with our best thinking is when we're not focusing on something or that attention.
There's actually a really cool study, and actually I'm just thinking of it now. I'll look it up and I'll send it to you, but it's before I even met you because I've had an interest in engineers for a little while and like an engineer's brain.
Mhm.
But it is about how engineers who have ADHD or who are neurodivergent in one way or another, um, they don't do as well in school from a mark point of view, but on the job later when they're working,
Yeah.
demonstrate more creativity and problem solving than their neurotypical counterparts.
Yeah, I'd be interested in that. And it's true.
I'll send it to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is kind of really interesting, and if you like it, you can link it or whatever. But it's there is interesting data out there about different like populations of people at work that
Mhm.
study, because a lot of people don't want to take medication because they worry it's going to limit their creativity.
Yep.
And I haven't had that experience. In fact, I think I'm more creative now as a creative. I do think of myself as a creative type in a lot of ways. So I think that can be an unfounded fear, but I think it's got to be the right medication. A lot of people are on the wrong meds.
Right. Um,
So
yeah,
there's
I'd be
that.
interested in that because I also think there's another misunderstood realm of ADHD, and that's with the technical professional world as well. Fact finders, follow throughs that do
Yeah.
follow the rules and do well,
Yeah.
but it's just a whole different
Yep.
silent suffering of hell.
Yes.
Um, so what is your next success project? I'm really interested in this.
So I am completing my horsemanship certification. I started riding in the spring, horseback riding, like just like Western riding with my son, because I
Mhm.
was like, I need something to do with my teenager that's new, that's going to keep us connected and learning something new together. And then for the second session, my husband joined us as well. So three of us have been riding once a week since like the beginning of April. And I've had like a longer love affair with horses before that, but was never a proficient rider. And experiencing myself the benefit of spending time with these magnificent animals makes the move into potentially offering equine therapy like a no-brainer for me.
Mhm.
So I started completing my horsemanship certification about a month ago. I should be done by sometime in early January. And I hope in the spring to put together an offering of equine therapy. And of course, it's going to be a wonderful resource for people who have PTSD, but for couples
Mhm.
and for neurodivergent folks and for families.
Sounds
Um,
great.
it's going to be so exciting. I can't
Cool.
wait.
Um, you can find more information at our website, which we'll have in the show notes.
Mhm.
And I think you should join up her newsletter, which we'll also put a link in the show notes. She's got a lot of good, interesting information and valid practical tips where I think everyone would be beneficial to join that.
Yeah.
So today, listeners, I just want you to understand how ADHD is misunderstood by others and how it can help gain awareness in how ADHD is perceived so you can explain the reactions and the treatments to yourself and be able to advocate for yourself a little more with your friends, family, especially your medical professional. Like Christina said, you have to demand the health care that you want and
Mhm.
don't do it alone. And what we've been speaking about is this outside view of ADHD. I think those are all
Yep.
fantastic. And then the last thing that she said that made a hell of a lot of sense to me was ADHD symptoms are similar to other mental health conditions that are viewed
Mhm.
from the outside, and we got to demand what we feel we require
Yeah. But to
for
be able to
support.
speak up and correct other clinicians
Yeah,
too, if they mischaracterize what it's like it's okay to say, sort of, but not quite. It's not
yeah,
quite right what my experience is. It's
yeah.
okay to say that.
And I found most doctors are appreciative that you do correct
Yes.
them because now
Yeah.
they want to help you.
Yeah. Well,
Believe
and
it
I
or
think
not, they
if you
do.
feel like they're shutting you down and you're kind of intimidated, I don't think they know they're doing that. So
Oh,
it might be a
much so.
self-awareness thing on their part.
Yeah.
I think if we're willing to give them the benefit of the doubt and reassert ourselves, it could be actually like a wonderful learning opportunity
Mhm,
for them too that you're providing. Not that you want to have to do that. It is what it is, right?
mhm. So to you, the listener, what type of lens are you viewing your ADHD? Because are you viewing it from the outside view that's accepted by everyone else and you're seeing it
Mm,
the same way? Or are you actually looking inside to see yours?
mm.
So I'll be really curious to see what you guys are thinking about that. If you can email me at andre@andreb.ca, I would really like to hear from you. Christina, thanks again for another great discussion here, and especially giving us a different point of view of how ADHD is done. And I think you should definitely trademark this ADHD in a different lens mindset because it's definitely something there for you. So thanks again.
Thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure.